So the first muscle up technique we're going to look at is the strict muscle up. And I think one important point to make on this one is that as much as it is difficult from a strength point of view, there are less potential pitfalls when it comes to the right timing and the technique and the kip that inevitably come up when you move into non-false grip or false grip kipping. So let's get straight into it. Now, the biggest mistake or fault that usually occurs with this type of muscle up is that people mimic the line of action of a strict pull-up, and what I mean by that is they pull directly up in a straight line. What this results in is the shoulders end up by your rings. You end up completely blocking yourself from being able to roll through into that transition. So you notice that as I'm pulling up with a slight lean back, and I'm pulling the rings down to my chest rather than the rings to my shoulders. So what this means then, if I hit that sweet spot on my chest, I've got room to roll round into the transition and land in the dip. So the 2 points to make there are: don't pull up in a straight line, and make sure that you're leant back as you pull the rings into your chest. Third thing is to make sure that you maintain the false grip throughout this, because again, if you find that your that wrist crease tends to slip off the rings at some stage, if you have poor grip strength or poor tolerance for endurance for that position, you lose that leverage that the false grip affords you to be able to more easily travel into a pulling position to a pressing position. Okay, so the next muscle up we're going to look at is the false grip kipping. And from the very start, I want to point out that one of the biggest limiting factors that I see preventing people from being able to achieve this particular technique is difficulty at the very beginning in being able to achieve a full elbow lockout with the false grip, with the turnout. And what this essentially does is it forces you to start on a kind of bent lever, and it means that you'll find it particularly difficult to get that backswing on the kip, which is really what is your powerhouse for driving that momentum, being able to effectively do your beat swing, going from the arch to the hollow. If your elbows are stuck bent from the very start, you just don't get that leverage. It's almost like trying to throw a ball without being able to cock your arm backwards. So if you ever have difficulty with that part, that's the part I'd start to try and fix before anything else, and we'll go through that fixes for that in a different video. But for now, you notice that I come back into my arch, I go into that beat swing, but then interestingly, what I do here is that I almost immediately break with the knees. So once I finish my arch, I throw my knees upwards until I'm almost in kind of like a chair position. So I shorten that lever as I'm coming up against gravity. So rather than being in a completely straight out line, I bend my knees up. I throw my knees up towards the rings to give me some height. And then, so I don't lose momentum too quickly and start to drop down, the next thing I do is that hip drive. So as soon as my feet cross that vertical line, knees bend and elbows bend. Now I'm not actually pulling, my elbows are just slightly flexed as I kip. The actual pull is going to come in at the very end after that hip drive when I've generated that weightlessness. So hip thrust, and then same as before in the strict, I pull while I've got after that hip drive. So hip drive, then pull. I pull the rings down to my chest, and then while I've got that weightlessness, I roll through into the transition. Alright, and then the final muscle up technique we're going to look at is the non-false grip kipping. And guys, this is by far, if you can get this, it's a lot easier on your hands. There's no doubt about it. The false grip feels, I'm trying not to swear here, but it feels pretty awful on your hands, and there's no real way around that apart from just sucking it up. So if you can get onto this, it's really it's a real great relief on the old wrist creases there. But anyway, back on track. So Biggest probably difference with the false grip is that debatably there's a kind of bigger beat swing to it. You now don't have that luxury of having your hands already set up in a pressing position, so you have to really make the most of that kip to get sufficient height to be able to get right around into the dip position. So you notice that on this backswing, first thing is that if you've ever heard of this term, I mean global extension. So in other words, it's almost like my entire body is in a kind of reverse C shape. I've got tension on my abs, my butt squeeze, my feet together to make me as streamlined as possible. And again, this is kind of like that sort of drawstring effect on a bow, or that cocking your arm back on a throw. And I'm extending myself as much as possible at this point, whilst gravity is going to effectively be working with me on the way down. So make sure you're hitting that globally extended position on the backswing. As I come through, and I've always liked this way Carl Powley phrases this when he says toes, knees, hips, pull, and I do follow this, but the point that I really noticed when I watched this was that as much as I lead with the toes when I come through, I'm very quickly to go into the knees, so I barely kind of have my toes kind of cross that 12 o'clock, no, I'm sorry, excuse me, 6 o'clock point before I shorten that lever, short myself again, and that was a point that was really valuable to me that I saw from Sean Lynn's videos. As you're working against gravity, it's advantageous to try and shorten your lever length. So that's exactly what I do. I shorten my body, my knees bend, I turn myself somewhat into that kind of chair-like position again. And then probably the biggest difference again with this one as opposed to the false grip kipping is that this time I really do max out that hip drive, so I don't leave anything left. I really almost fully extend my hip here. My shoulders are still slightly above my hips, but not by a huge degree. And what I'd say is that's just to try and afford you as much height as possible to make up for the fact that you're not already in that pressing position. So hip thrust as hard as you can, create that weightlessness, and then when you get to that point, the rings are still coming down, maybe a little bit lower on my chest, and then I'm rolling over. So it's global extension on the arch, toes first, knees. So shorten those knees as soon as your as soon as your feet effectively cross the halfway point, that vertical line. Knees up, hip drive, pull, and then that fold through, that kind of sit up as fast as you can transition. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you found this useful. Any questions, please feel more than free to post them. And you can do that either on the comment section below on the video, or find us Athlete Fix on Facebook, at Athlete Fix on Twitter. Feel free to give me a tweet. And yeah, stay tuned for the next one. Okay, thanks, guys.